Hey guys, it's Mark here for another Getting to Know the Community show. We've got a very special guest on this one. This is Hannah Glass that you'll see very soon in the chair over here. We did the special effects, if you remember that last year, where we made her magically appear. This time we have her live and in person, and we're going to really get into it in terms of the background that she's had in being in this space for as long as she has over at KWM, in terms of the blockchain side of things, the stuff that they're seeing in the world of data and AI. And we'll discuss the change that happened last week, which was Blockchain Week, all about the move of Blockchain Australia to now being called the Digital Economy Council of Australia, or DECA, if the first one is a bit of a mouthful. And it is all about this mainstreaming and making sure that people know and are aware that blockchain is really the technology that will drive this future of finance, future of commerce. It's just fintech. So it's really great to see folks like Hannah that will be able to share her stories and insights, and we're really looking forward to this one. So check it out soon. And we're back with Hannah Glass of KWM. Thank you so much for joining us, Hannah. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome being here. Actually, this is a beautiful, beautiful place.
I mean, like, great views. You've got the bridge behind you. You've got this thing over here, the
Otherwise known as the Sydney Opera House, one of the most iconic buildings in the world.
Absolutely. We had Raoul Pal here last week, actually. So they had a panel over there, and we were taking photos just before it all went crazy and stuff. And before he came in, we actually took him downstairs, and they took plenty of photos out there. And it just goes to show that when people come here, they really want to come to this area. So,
well, I mean, Sydney and Australia might be a little far from a distance perspective, but it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And I think it's
worth it.
Oh, totally worth it. Such a privilege being able to live here.
Absolutely. And speaking of like living here, let's get into your background and how you got into being an amazing lawyer and working in the crypto space. But what is your journey, and like, how did you first of all get into the law?
How did I get into the law? Ooh, now we're really delving back. So my original idea for a career was actually to be a ballerina.
Amazing. I think you could have done really well at that.
Well, my dad did turn around to me and said, that's really nice, but it's not going to happen. And part of that was because in order to pursue that career, you had to quit school halfway through high school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a tradie almost.
Totally. If you think about the hours and dedication that go into dancing, it's a similar level of training to any athlete, except because of when you start and when your career starts, you actually end up sacrificing quite a lot.
Okay.
It's, in any case, it wasn't to be. I did a lot of ballet throughout school. I even, unfortunately, haven't done class in a few years, but did continue as an adult as well.
Oh, amazing.
But when I realized dancing was probably not going to be the right career path for me, I looked out there and said, well, what do I actually enjoy? Funnily enough, in school, what I really enjoyed was maths and languages.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they're kind of at two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, pre-AI days, and we'll get into that, but I think they're much closer now.
Totally. But I think it's also because if you think about maths and sciences, you think about logic and rules. And when you think about language, you think about creativity and invention and shades of grey and colour and light.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, that kind of neglects the fact that maths has a creative side to it too. It also neglects to understand that language has rules and structure. And I looked at, what would allow me to pursue those kind of different parts of my brain, so to speak. And I did work experience in a law firm, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I enjoyed it because it had that same element of logic, but it was logic through words.
Wow. Okay.
And I went, right, that's it. I'm not going to be a ballerina. I'm going to be a lawyer. And the rest is history. I was like, I was dogmatic about going, right, that's it. I'm going to get into law. I'm going to do this. I decided I was going to work in a large law firm. I arguably work in the absolute best law firm in Australia.
Right over there. Yep.
Also has nice views. But for me, what I wanted to do is be at the top of my field
Mm.
within the law.
Mhm.
And whilst my original idea was to do sort of typical M&A type work, where I've ended up has been in an area that literally didn't exist when I started, when I started law school, and certainly when I started practicing as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
And helped create the niche of this particular practice.
That is absolutely amazing. And going back to what you said there before, that mixture, and it absolutely makes sense now why you're a lawyer. And so my colleague is, Arturo. One of the things that he says, and I mentioned AI before, is his point of view, and we agree with this, right? When you look at the way that AI works, or generative AI, not the totality of AI, but just the specific area that lawyers, psychologists, people that are really good with understanding human behavior and language would make the best coders in this future world where programming is done by the English language. And so it absolutely makes sense, A, that you're a lawyer, and why lawyers are really good at this, because the thing with large language models, and not to get too techie into it in this intro, but they're basically turning words into numbers, and we found a whole lot of mathematical patterns in words. So it's absolutely amazing that how you landed where you are, your prime position for this future that we're going to be in.
I'd like to think so.
So look, let's get more into the work that you're doing at KWM, or King and Wood Mallesons, as some people may more know it as. But KWM, we've done events with you guys, with bringing clients together, seeing the amazing views, not just when we have meetings and stuff, but actually running events there. So watch this space, because it's a really cool spot. But I'm really interested in the work that you guys are doing over at KWM. I guess over the past couple of years, and even more recently in this blockchain space. I'm sure most people know you in this space, but let's just say an alien landed here from another country, from another planet, and has just come to Australia and learning about blockchain. What would you tell them that you guys are doing in that area?
So I would say that our practice focuses on the intersection of new technologies, and particularly finance and financial services and financial systems. Blockchain is one of the aspects of that, and we really see it as that foundational technology. So the practice actually came out of our traditional financial markets and regulatory practice.
Oh, okay.
So it didn't exist as part of our tech team. It's
Right.
actually from that perspective of what happens when we change the underlying technology that is used to deliver those same financial services.
Yeah.
And when you take it from that perspective, you're able to kind of look through the tech to how it's used to assess what are the benefits, what are the risks that we've removed, how do we actually create a better system. And that's really where it all started. So my traditional background as a baby lawyer was pure financial services reg. I did a bit of funds work, derivatives, payments, and in my spare time I started looking at this new area of fintech. And that was everything to do with that intersection of tech and financial services, and really it was when people were disrupting the existing financial services industry, particularly post GFC. So,
and the rise of blockchain and Bitcoin and all that kind of stuff that came about.
Exactly. So that was part of, so if you think about what happened in fintech, we had the rise of new platforms with things like equity crowdfunding, so new ways of raising money. We had non-bank lenders providing loans in smaller amounts, including things like buy now, pay later. We had the rise of new payment providers with things like M-Pesa and Bitcoin. And it really was just Bitcoin back then.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing else.
No.
When did you read the white paper? Did you get to that?
2013.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yep.
So there's some people in this space, folks, that have been in here early. Like we just celebrated, I think it was like a decade of Blockchain Australia.
Yep.
And we saw and met some of the people that were early in this space. The work that you were doing, was this all at KWM at the time?
No, so that was actually at another law firm.
Okay.
And really it was my passion project.
Oh, right.
So this wasn't my day-to-day job. But my day-to-day job being in financial services meant I had that foundation.
Yep.
And then I would go off to meetups and speak with industry groups and kind of sit there thinking, I'm not going to say anything. And then someone said, oh no, but Bitcoin's money. And I couldn't help myself. And I had to jump in. And going from being literally the youngest and to some extent least qualified person in the room, from the number of degrees and years practicing in my field, I recognized that around the table in those discussions were very few people who actually knew the legal framework. We had some brilliant entrepreneurs, we had amazing traders, we had brilliant developers. But ultimately, when you're talking about how this works in the real world, it's what's the problem you're solving? So that's what's the actual commercial solution. What's the tech you're using to deliver that? But it's got to deliver the commercial solution. And then what's the legal framework that surrounds that? And we kind of had the first two. And then I looked around and I was the only person really who had the third. And it was a really exciting position to be in because you could have conversations not about what the legal framework is, but what it should be.
Absolutely interesting to see that that was even being discussed way back then. And yes, it's you that's like bringing it up, and maybe they wouldn't have done it. And I'd argue that there's still probably groups that don't even discuss it. It's far less now. But without that legal side of things, I'd argue that anything that you're trying to do is going to be ultimately difficult. You end up having to move overseas without the clarity, or when, you know, it doesn't go with what it is that you're looking to do yourself. It does make it harder to work in a space in a country. Like, even though, we're all digital, we still exist, like we exist online, but we still exist in a physical kind of space. We haven't uploaded ourselves, you know, to the web, or whatever that future thing is going to be yet. So we still have to have, you know, an understanding of what the legal ramifications are, because if you can't live in a space and you're lucky enough to move, you move, right? Or you try to work within the boundaries here, because otherwise you get sued, you get fined, you get sanctioned. So it's very important, and people, I think, haven't realized that. And it's different now, I think, but very cool what you guys are doing over there. So what are kind of what's to someone like wondering, like, so what is it that you guys do as lawyers working in this, you know, this digital kind of space and stuff? What kind of work are you doing?
What are we doing? So we, in terms of the clients we work with everyone from small startups through to major ASX 50 companies, international businesses. We've even assisted with projects like Project Atom, which was the Reserve Bank of Australia's wholesale central bank digital currency project, where they were looking at using a central bank digital currency to settle and manage a syndicated facility agreement, really complex loan structure over the life cycle of that instrument. So we service the entire spectrum of the industry. And I think that's a bit unique, because there are those who will kind of focus on the high growth and startups. There are those who say, no, we're only going to take the big end of town. And we recognize that this industry has so many different diverse perspectives and views and products, and you actually need to have all of them working together. And to be honest, everyone needs the same legal advice and legal understanding, because you don't want a situation where you only have some people who can play. You want everyone to be able to play in this space. Yeah,
exactly.
And everyone to succeed.
Blockchain is definitely one of those things where, and it's a feature and a curse in a way, where you have this kind of technology where you need multiple players to be able to be part of this network, to really take advantage of the power of it. Yet when you don't have that, yet on the other side, the flip side is that it takes time for this to work. It's not like AI, where we can just go into a place and go, here, use this tool, I can start using it. Blockchain needs a bit more than that, but I'd argue it's very powerful because of that.
Well, blockchain is fundamentally it's fundamentally about the network effect. If you do not have the network and you haven't thought about the structure of that network, you don't have the architecture. And I think that's where, if you're looking at blockchain or AI, they're both foundational technologies, but they play in slightly different spaces. So AI, we think much more about the output. It's what do you receive from the AI tool that you're using? Is it a generative AI tool? Is it a generative AI tool for a particular use case? Generating music, for example. Are we generating a particular piece of writing that you can then post as a little marketing spiel, or is it something else that you're using to assist you with writing legal advice? Or is it actually, let's say, something which is more about the large language model? So it's assisting you to come up with an answer in a process that is ingesting information quicker than a human being can, and from different sources that would take much more time to actually collate that information, and then providing an output. Now, they're different types of AI, but ultimately what we're looking at there is the output. And even if you think about sort of the early types of AI, and the first example of AI that I kind of was aware of was actually Garry Kasparov, so the old chess master,
Yep.
playing against IBM's Big Blue.
Mm.
And so there was a game there was a match in 96, which he lost.
Yep.
So which he won. Match in 97, which he lost.
Yes.
And the amazing thing about that is the technology then was absolutely mind-blowing for that
For
time.
then, yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's kind of normal.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show the speed at which it changes. But also, it was the output that was mind-blowing. It was the fact that a computer program could beat the best in the world. And then we also had IBM Watson beating the best players in Go.
Yeah.
More complex game, more complex system. But again, it's about the result of it. It's the output.
Absolutely.
When you're looking at blockchain, it's a fun foundational technology, but it's actually about how we store and manage data. And so we're looking at who has access to what information when, who can add to that information when, and then how do you protect and preserve that going forward? It is far less tangible.
Yeah.
And so
Agreed.
I think when people look at blockchain and the early use cases and some of the work we were doing in sort of 2017 and 2018, when it was all about blockchain, not Bitcoin, and how we're going to use this in blockchain for X, pick your poison, dentists, property, bonds. Out of all of those, the bonds still work. The bonds are actually a really fascinating example, but funnily enough, dentists aren't using blockchain. Go figure.
Yeah, not enough. Who knows why?
Yeah. But in any case, what they didn't appreciate is blockchain's not about the output. It's about managing the data. And when you look at it in that way, you recognize that blockchain needs to be part of that stack. Underneath the blockchain, you also have cloud, also underpins AI.
Yep.
And at its foundational level, you've got data. So you end up with, and I'm stealing a term here from three very eminent professors, Ross Buckley.
Borrow.
No, credit where credit's due. Ross Buckley, Dirk Zitscher, and Doug Arner, who are three of the most preeminent minds in fintech theory and practice from a legal perspective. And they talk about this as being A, B, C, and D.
Aha.
AI, blockchain, cloud, and data.
Absolutely amazing that it all fits in there.
Yep.
That's so good. We're gonna go into more of the blockchain side of things and that mainstreaming as the next one, but just check the links below, folks, because we're gonna have some real. So we just mentioned the ABCD part there, and something that, as you were talking, that just comes straight to mind for me is that a lot of people, they understand how AI helps all of these different areas, and then we can see how it helps blockchain and projects and stuff like that. But little do people realize that blockchain is going to be needed by AI, not just for things like security, and like we're doing it with what we're building by having ZK proofs as micro signatures / digital attestation, saying that I, the human doctor or whatever, sign off that this is the correct output because I've read over it, so human in the loop. But micropayments as well, it's fascinating stuff because like you can't do easily without a blockchain micropayments. It's too costly and expensive. So there's going to be all these things in this future very digital economy kind of space that blockchain is going to help the AI side of things. So it's really fascinating, the ABCD.
Well, what we're really talking about here is taking that tech neutral approach and saying, what are we actually building? And more importantly, what's the problem that we're solving?
That's it.
And what's the problem we're solving? What's the best tools that we have to do that? And then how do we make sure it works appropriately? Because on the AI side, we keep on talking about things like ethical frameworks. Now, it's not about making sure we operate ethically in the ethics of society, although of course that is fundamental to it. But it's your point about human in the loop. How do we make sure that humans are there? And part of it's because when we rely on tech, we almost end up de-skilling humans
Mm.
because we rely so much on the technology. And that is actually problematic. So it's not the tech itself, it's about our reaction to that technology. And
Mm.
so we sometimes need frameworks around it to actually enable that.
Oh no, I completely agree. Frameworks are massively important because without it, I mean, it's Wild West, and we're seeing the whole kind of blockchain space going from being a Wild West to being much more mainstream and whatnot. But I think because we've come from that blockchain space and understanding just how much tech can be used to help improve supply chain payments, security of data, and all that kind of stuff, we look at it. We look at AI from a different lens, I believe. I think we've got an advantage here, which we want others to have, obviously, which is why we're talking about it. But I think it's really fascinating coming into AI after seeing the pros, the cons, the good and the bad of blockchain tech and how it's going to change things. So just on that note, we were at a gala dinner last week.
We were.
So really interesting to see that Blockchain Australia has now changed in terms of its name and focus to now being called the Digital Economy Council of Australia. And for you, what does it mean for you that now they've got this wider kind of focus?
So I think it's quite an interesting rebrand. Now, obviously I can't talk about any particular organization and why they might have gone down one path or another. Wasn't in the room. But I think it's a matter of saying, well, are we looking at tech first or are we problem solving first? And if we say we're not looking at the tech because we're not trying to shoehorn it into a use case, we're trying to say, how do we solve problems? And where is our economy going? And what are the types of problems we're going to need to solve into the future? Then we say, well, we've got these foundational technologies. We have data that underpins everything that we're doing. We're living in a digitized world. We have cloud, which stores all of our information.
Yep.
And we're much more used to that as well. So if you went back 15, 20 years, large financial institutions weren't using cloud. Now we have frameworks for them to enable to do that. And we have frameworks that ensure that they can meet the resiliency requirements that are required, leveraging that as a method of data storage. We have things like AI and we have blockchain as well. The next question is not what tech you're using. You don't say, I want to know what engine is in my car. You want to know that the car goes from A to B. You want to know that the brakes work. But ultimately, you want to get from A to B safely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you say, well, what are we actually building and how do we solve that problem? So we move from foundational technologies to foundational frameworks.
Okay.
And the foundational frameworks of our economy or the future economy are likely to be things like consumer data right.
Yep.
As in the right that you as an individual have to your information that is stored by third parties. And it's not about privacy, it's actually about your ability to access that information, to provide it to the people who are going to be able to use it to provide services to you for your benefit. Choice, convenience, control, competition. It's all about that data and that information behind it that exists in so much of what we do every moment of every day.
Absolutely. I think, and funnily enough, you mentioned CDR because I was a moderator for the FinTech Marketplace event last week, and we had a colleague of yours, Scott, who, if you guys don't know Scott Farrell, I was told by someone else in the room that, oh my God, you got the godfather of CDR here. And open banking. So we had a panel on CDR and open banking, and it was like CDR is life, right? But what do you kind of think in the future when we're just going to have all of these notifications, just like 50 notifications on the phone to do with like, do you want to subscribe to this? Do you want to do that?
Well, we have 50 notifications.
Think about
how many times a day you're browsing the internet and you get a pop-up that says, do you accept cookies? Now, that's irritating, but a lot of the time you go through, and personally I will deselect everything that I can. But every time you do that, there's data.
Yep.
Imagine if every time you did that, there was data and you said, okay, fine, I'm accepting that, but I can then access and make use of that information myself. That's the idea behind a sort of industry agnostic consumer data right now. Obviously, that is not where we are now. And that is not really the purpose of CDR. CDR is about that access to the information so that you are in control of your information and your data. But it's not about controlling access to your information. It's about so you can use your information. If you look at the framework we have in Australia for CDR, that is based on an economy-wide structure. It's not based on payments and it's not based on privacy. And it differs to, say, the structures that we see in the EU, which are much more based around privacy and payments, and the UK, which is based around payments. But the whole idea is it's a combination of system, structure. There are privacy elements to it too, as well as data standards. And it's the combination of all of those and the application to different industries, banking being the first, energy being the second, and others over time, including non-bank lending and this like. That is what creates this right that you have to your information and the ability to use that information. Now, that's just one of these kind of foundational frameworks. The others are things like central bank digital currencies, and that's really about about the digitization of money. It's actually about the monetization of data. And so that's not saying we all have internet banking, we can transfer money from bank to bank, peer to peer, almost instantly through that network in Australia, through other networks elsewhere in the world. But it's actually about saying, what's the other information? How do we control the movement of that money? In which circumstances? And how do we do that cross-border? That's where central bank digital currencies and stablecoins come into it too. And then the other framework, which is fundamental, is digital ID.
That was also discussed at the FinTech Marketplace event. Very important.
It is really important. And the reason why is not because you need a digital version of your driver's license on your phone, although that is really helpful, something we do have in New South Wales.
Yep. Thank you, Victor Dominello, former minister.
But it's actually about the ability to prove you are who you say you are when you're interacting in an online environment.
Yep.
And because if you think about how do we access services, so many of them are online. In order to be able to prove who you are in that environment, you need a system which interacts and is interoperable with that. And so that's what the Trusted Digital Identity Framework is all about.
Because right now we can just, in our Discord, we had someone impersonating me and I was getting questions of people going, did you just ask me about this? My first thought is I would never ask you about how's your trading going and stuff. That's not where we like the investment side of things, but we're much more here for the builders, especially myself anyway. But I did come from that investment kind of banking space, so I've got no problem with it. I think it's fascinating stuff, and I used to work as an analyst in that space, but that is not something I'd asked of my crew. And yet it's hard to tell because there is no way to verify that it's me apart from like looking at the name, looking at the style of how, people are talking. And even then, if you know the little signs to look for, even those can still be tricked. So we need better ways, whether it's with ZK proofs and stuff, to irrefutably prove that the only way that this could have happened is from so-and-so, or be able to prove stuff without actually having to move the data around. Like, I think digital IDs are fascinating. And you mentioned there on the CBDC side of things, a lot of people that may be watching might be worried, but it's like, why is there that worry? And the worry is about privacy and government knowing what you're spending. But yet we've got ways that in terms of the technology that you can have privacy in it. The way that we did the CBDC kind of pilot as not centralized was with privacy, apart from the folks that are actually the counterparties to the trade. No one else knows what was going on in that trade. So there are these ways that we can tackle the problems that people come up with in terms of all this kind of stuff. So it's really fascinating stuff. It's a cool field to be in.
Oh, totally. And I think your point there around what are we doing with that tech? So how do we make things private? So if you're thinking about a central bank digital currency, the reason why you need that privacy element baked in is not so you can protect the individual. It's actually because we have, for commerce to operate, things are commercial in confidence. And if you can't do that, then this is not going to actually work as a means of exchange through our economy.
Blockchain is not anonymous, folks. It's pseudonymous. And that means that you and I have done a trade. Now you can see on that wallet all the history of things that I've done. And if you're a company, if I can see all the history of transactions you've got, I might not know exactly what they are, but maybe I can have a guess from seeing the amounts. If it's a cafe and everything is like $5, five stablecoin dollars, and then there's a 5,000 charge and I see a shiny new coffee machine, guess what? I can backtrace and figure out that that transaction there must have been for the coffee machine or something. It's not,
Yeah.
we don't have that natively in blockchain, but this is important to have.
But I think that's also where you, going back to the really early part of our discussion, it's about the tech stack, and it's about saying
Yep.
it's not blockchain for X and blockchain solves the problem. It's not AI for X and AI solves the problem. It's actually, what is the problem we're solving and how do we make it work? And it's that question of what risks are we removing, but what are we introducing? And what else do we need to do to manage or mitigate that? And so when this is something we do when we work with clients, because we work with people who are building these sorts of solutions from the ground up. We also work with people who are implementing this in new and interesting ways, particularly in traditional financial services world, but a whole raft of other areas, as well as people who are doing things like building exchanges and those sorts of things. But what we've actually found is the question is not what's the tech. It's how does it work and what else do you need and what are the different links that you need between the different parts of the tech stack. And then more importantly, from our perspective at least, is what are the legal frameworks around to make sure it actually works as intended?
Yeah.
And that's the solving problems part.
Going back to what you said earlier, it's not just like the tech and I forgot what the second one was. My goodness, I am getting old. But the legal framework being the third part of that triumvirate, I guess you could say. Is triumvirate 3? Yes. Let's look that up. Let's make sure that is. But I think you're absolutely...
It's tech, commercial, and legal.
There you go. Because if you don't have the tech and commercial, what are you doing? But if you don't have the legal, why are you doing that?
But it's also, how do you make sure it actually works?
Yeah.
And the legal is the thing that sits underneath, and you don't rely on the contract in 99.9% of the time when everything is working beautifully. But in that 0.1%, when it's not working beautifully, the terms and conditions of the user arrangement, the actual rules around the operation of a platform, the rules regarding who is responsible for which parts of the technology, and the contracts between those counterparties become fundamentally important. And it's fundamentally important to make sure that the system can continue operating. And this is kind of the difference between playing with new tech and experimenting POCs, pilots, and use cases to actual implementation, is you need to have a degree of resiliency within your system. And that resiliency isn't just about cybersecurity, it's about whole of system resiliency.
And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the real world where it's not just the POCs, but we're seeing much more tokenization things going on. We're lucky enough to be working on something that will be announced when that does get completed. But even then, like the way that we think about regulation completely changes when it comes to blockchain, because now with smart contracts, we can have the not enforcement, but even just stopping people from doing the wrong thing before it even gets to enforcement. We can do that within the smart contracts. It's really fascinating stuff, but we're going to have to end soon because I'm going to run out of film on here.
And I think we could talk about that in terms of tokenization and smart contracts forever, because smart contracts was really where I went from, this is interesting, to, oh my God, this is awesome.
Wow. Well, you know what? We're going to have to say that for part 2. So let's call this part 1 with Hannah. And real Hannah, not cardboard cutout Hannah like I did with the special effects last week. Much better in real life, as you can see. But how do people get in touch with you? Where is it best to connect if they're interested in all this kind of stuff?
So best place to find me, I am occasionally on the site formerly known as Twitter at Hannah_Glass. Better way to find me is probably through LinkedIn. Look up Hannah Glass, King of Wood Mallesons, and you'll find me.
Perfect. In the show notes. But Hannah, for part 1, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.